At my promotion dinner, my stepmom laughed loudly, saying, "Imagine him sitting with us here." Ugh, while everyone else nodded. My boss raised an eyebrow and asked, "Who are they talking about?" I clinked my glass and smiled me. Apparently, I'm still not good enough. The room fell quiet, until my boss said something that made her choke on her wine. I never imagined that the night meant to celebrate my greatest achievement would turn into a moment of reckoning. But maybe I should have. My name is Lucas Harrington, and I've spent my entire life feeling like an outsider in my own family. I don't know why I thought it would be any different tonight. Maybe some small, stupid part of me still believed they'd finally see me, really see me, for who I had become. But they never did, and they never would. The promotion had been years in the making. Senior manager at one of the top consulting firms in Chicago, a title I had bled for. I'd spent a decade grinding, working twice as hard as anyone else, proving myself over and over. And now it was mine. My boss, Richard Calloway, had been the one to suggest a dinner. "This is a big deal, Lucas," he had said in his usual gruff tone. "Bring your family. Let's celebrate properly." I hesitated. Family? I barely had one. But the thing is, I wanted them to see this. Not because I needed their approval. I had stopped chasing that years ago, but because I wanted to show them. I wanted them to sit in a room full of successful people and realize that I had made it without them. So, against my better judgment, I called my father, Gerald Harrington. "I got promoted," I said, keeping my voice neutral. There was silence on the other end before he finally responded. "That's unexpected. Not congratulations. Not I'm proud of you. Just unexpected." Still, he agreed to come, along with his wife, Sylvia, and their 2 children, Brandon and Caitlin, my half-siblings. And just like that, the stage was set. The restaurant was one of those upscale steakhouses with low lighting, leather booths, and a wine list so extensive it had its own sommelier. I arrived early with Richard and a few colleagues. "This is your night, Lucas," Richard said, clapping me on the back. "Enjoy it." I smiled, but my stomach was already twisting into knots. Then, they arrived. My father, looking as stiff as ever in his expensive gray suit. Sylvia, draped in some overpriced designer dress. Brandon and Caitlin, both in their mid-20s, dressed like they had just stepped off a yacht. They didn't belong in my world, and I sure as HLL didn't belong in theirs. We sat down, and for the first 20 minutes, everything was civil. Not warm, not affectionate, just polite enough. And then it happened. Sylvia laughed loudly, the kind of laugh that turns heads. "Imagine him sitting with us here." "Ugh," she said, waving a hand as if the very idea was absurd. I froze. The table fell into awkward silence. I turned my gaze to my father, to Brandon, to Caitlin. They all nodded along, like it was obvious, like it was just a fact of life that I, Lucas Harrington, didn't belong at the same table as them. I felt my jaw tighten, but before I could say anything, Richard spoke. His voice was sharp, dangerous. "Who are they talking about?" he asked, looking between them. I let out a slow breath, picked up my whiskey, and forced a smile. "Me," I said simply. "Apparently, I'm still not good enough." The room went silent. I could feel my colleagues watching. I could see the restaurant staff glancing over, sensing the shift in energy. Even the sommelier, who had been mid-explanation about a vintage bottle of Bordeaux, stopped talking. Sylvia's face paled. Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression turning ice cold. "And what, exactly, makes you think you're better than Lucas?" he asked, his voice laced with something I had never heard him use before, disgust. Sylvia coughed, reaching for her napkin. My father cleared his throat. "Richard, this isn't." Richard cut him off. "No, Gerald. I'd really like to hear the answer to that." The tension at the table was suffocating. I sat back, watching them squirm. Finally, Sylvia spoke, her voice forced and tight. "We didn't mean it like that. We just were surprised. Lucas never really fit in with us." There it was. The truth. I had never been one of them. I never would be. Richard let out a short, humorless laugh. Then he turned to me. "Lucas, how about we move to the bar? I'd rather not waste time with people who can't recognize greatness when it's right in front of them." The humiliation on their faces? Priceless. As I stood, my father sputtered, "Richard, wait." But Richard wasn't done. He looked my father dead in the eye and said, "If I had a son like Lucas, I'd be damn proud of him. You, on the other hand, I feel sorry for you." And just like that, we walked away. That dinner was the last time I ever saw them. A few months later, Brandon lost his job. He reached out to me, asking if I could put in a good word for him at my firm. I left his message on read. Sylvia sent an email, apologizing, but only because she wanted me to help Caitlin get an internship. I deleted it. And my father? He never called. I guess some things never change. But here's the thing, I have. And I'm never looking back. That night, as Richard and I moved to the bar, I felt something shift inside me. I had spent years trying to prove something to people who had already decided I wasn't worth their time. Tonight was the first time I truly understood that it wasn't me who had failed them, they had failed me. Richard ordered 2 whiskeys, neat, and handed me one. He studied me for a moment before saying, "You all right?" I took a sip and exhaled slowly. "Yeah." He smirked. "Liar." I chuckled, shaking my head. "You caught that, huh? You've worked for me for 8 years, Lucas. I know when you're bullshitting." I sighed. "It's just, I shouldn't be surprised. But it still stings." Richard nodded, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Look, I don't know the whole story with your family, but I do know this. You don't need them." I let out a humorless laugh. "I know that." "Do you?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because from where I'm standing, you just spent your biggest night hoping they'd finally see your worth. FCK that. You're worth more than they could ever recognize." I didn't say anything. I just sat there, letting his words sink in. He clinked his glass against mine. "To moving the HLL on." I hesitated, then clinked back. "To moving the HLL on." 2 days later, Brandon texted me. "Brandon, hey man, congrats on the promotion. Listen, I could really use some advice. Mind if we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time before finally locking my phone. The audacity. I ignored it. Then, an email from Sylvia. Subject: about the other night. "Lucas, I think there was a misunderstanding at dinner. We were joking, and I'm sorry if it came off the wrong way. We are very proud of your success. In fact, Caitlin is currently looking for internship opportunities in the corporate world, and we were wondering if you could help her find something at your firm. Let's not let one awkward dinner ruin the family bond. Hope to hear from you soon." Sylvia, I read it twice. Then again. I laughed. Actually laughed. After years of dismissing me, after treating me like a stranger in my own father's house, the moment they needed something, suddenly, they were proud of me. I didn't respond. 2 days later, another message from Brandon. "Brandon, hey man, did you get my text? Would love to catch up." I still didn't reply. It was about a month later when my father called. I was sitting in my office when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Gerald Harrington. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something in me, some lingering part of the son I used to be, made me answer. "Hello." A pause. Then, "Lucas." His voice was careful, almost hesitant. "I didn't think I'd hear from you," I said flatly. I figured you were still upset." I let out a short laugh. "Upset? No, Dad. I'm done." Silence. Then he sighed. "Look, I know that night didn't go the way it should have." I stayed quiet. Sylvia told me she reached out, and you never responded." "She did," I said. "And, well, you could at least acknowledge her, Lucas. She's trying to make amends." I let that sit for a second. Then I asked, "Dad, why now? What do you mean? I mean, why are you suddenly calling me? Why does Sylvia suddenly care? Why does Brandon want to catch up? Because it sure as HLL isn't out of love." He didn't answer right away. Then, finally, he muttered, "Brandon lost his job." There it was. "And Caitlin?" I asked, already knowing. "She's struggling to find an internship." I laughed. Actually laughed. My father sighed heavily. "Lucas, come on. You're in a position to help." I gritted my teeth. "You know what's funny, Dad? I've been in a position to help myself my entire life, and you never gave it SHD. But now that your real kids need something, suddenly, I'm family." His tone hardened. "That's not fair." "Fair." I repeated. "You want to talk about fair? You ignored me my whole life. Treated me like a burden. Now, when it benefits you, you suddenly remember my number?" "Lucas," he said, his voice low, "I am still your father." I clenched my jaw. I took a deep breath. Then I exhaled and said, "No, Dad, you're not." And I hung up. I stared at my phone for a long time after that. It didn't ring again. And that's when I knew. For the first time in my life, I was free. After hanging up, I expected some kind of emotion to hit me. Anger, sadness, regret, something. But all I felt was a strange, eerie silence in my mind, like my brain was still catching up to what had just happened. I had cut him off. Not in a fit of rage, not in some dramatic outburst, but with finality. And he knew it too. Because for the first time in my life, my father didn't call back. But the thing about people like him, people like Sylvia and my half-siblings, they don't stop when they want something. The next day, I got another text from Brandon. "Brandon, Lucas, come on, man. We're brothers. You're really going to ignore me?" Brothers. That word used to mean something to me when I was younger. When I was desperate to be included, to be one of them. But we weren't brothers. Brothers don't nod along when their stepmother laughs at you like you're garbage. Brothers don't watch you struggle through life and never lift a finger to help. I still didn't reply. And that's when they got desperate. A week passed. Then 2. The text stopped. The emails stopped. And for a moment, I let myself believe that was the end of it. Until I got home one night and found Sylvia waiting at my front door. I almost didn't recognize her at first. The woman who usually carried herself with such smug confidence looked rattled. Like she had never once in her life begged for anything. And she hated that tonight might be the first time. "Lucas," she greeted, forcing a tight-lipped smile. "You've been avoiding us." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Jesus, Sylvia, showing up at my house. That's low, even for you." She had the decency to look mildly embarrassed. But she didn't move. "Can we talk?" she asked. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and, after a moment, let it hang open behind me. She hesitated before following me in. She looked around my condo, her eyes sweeping over the modern furniture, the high ceilings, the framed degrees on the wall. It was exactly the kind of place she would have approved of if someone else owned it. Nice place, she said, trying for casual. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Why are you here, Sylvia? She exhaled slowly, as if this was painful for her. Lucas, I know we haven't always had the best relationship. I snorted. That's an interesting way to describe 28 years of treating me like a stain on your shoe. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't take the bait. Regardless, she continued, I want to make things right. I raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. This has nothing to do with making things right, and everything to do with Brandon and Caitlin needing favors. She bristled, but didn't deny it. I just think, she said carefully, that family should support each other. I barked out a laugh. Oh, you do? That's funny, because I seem to recall a lifetime of you making damn sure I wasn't part of this family. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I misjudged you, she admitted stiffly. I didn't think you'd become this. She gestured vaguely around my condo. I tilted my head. What? Successful? Worth something? She didn't answer. Instead, she took a breath and lowered her voice, her tone suddenly softer. Lucas, listen. I know I wasn't fair to you growing up, but things are different now. We need to move forward. I just stared at her, and then I asked, very quietly, would you be here right now if Brandon hadn't lost his job? A flicker of something crossed her face. Guilt, maybe. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. This doesn't have to be ugly, she said instead. We can help each other. I let her words sink in. Help each other. What she really meant was, we ignored you for years, but now you have something we need. So let's pretend we were always close. I shook my head, laughing under my breath. You know, I mused, it's funny. You spent my whole life making sure I wasn't part of your perfect little family. But now that I'm the only one who made something of myself, suddenly I matter. Sylvia's mouth pressed into a thin line. You're being dramatic. I raised an eyebrow. Am I? You literally laughed at the idea of me sitting at the same table as you. She flinched. For the first time, I saw something crack in her. For the first time, she looked afraid. Not of me, not of my anger, but of what it meant if I walked away. Because for once, she needed me, and I didn't need her. The power had shifted, and she knew it. I let the silence stretch between us before finally pushing off the counter. Get out, Sylvia. She stiffened. Lucas, be reasonable. I met her gaze, my voice cold. I said, get out. She hesitated. Then, realizing there was nothing left to say, she turned on her heel and walked to the door. Just before stepping out, she glanced back over her shoulder, her voice tight. You'll regret this. I smiled. I really don't think I will. And with that, she left. I stood there for a long time after she was gone, staring at the door, waiting for the usual wave of doubt, of second-guessing, of guilt. But it never came. Instead, all I felt was relief. Like I had finally, after all these years, let go of a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. But something told me this wasn't over yet. Because if there was one thing I knew about my father and Sylvia, it was this: they didn't like to lose. And something told me they weren't done trying to win. For a few weeks, everything was quiet. Too quiet. I thought maybe, just maybe, Sylvia had finally accepted defeat. That my father had realized I wasn't going to be their backup plan. That Brandon and Caitlin had figured out they'd have to clean up their own messes. But of course, I should have known better. Because when people like them don't get what they want, they don't just walk away. They make sure you suffer for telling them no. It started subtly. Whispers. Side eyes at work from people who normally had no reason to care about me. A few colleagues suddenly acting colder than usual. Then, one morning, Richard stopped by my office. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching me for a long moment. What's going on, Lucas? He finally asked. I frowned. What do you mean? He exhaled sharply, stepping in and closing the door behind him. Never a good sign. I mean, I had two different people casually mention to me that you're not as put together as you seem. That you stepped on people to get here. That you abandoned your family when they needed you. I felt my entire body go rigid. Richard studied me. Any idea where that's coming from? I clenched my jaw. Oh, I had a damn good idea. I let out a humorless laugh. So that's their move, huh? If they can't use me, they'll ruin me. Richard tilted his head. So this is about your father? I nodded. And Sylvia? He sighed, rubbing his temples. Jesus. Some people really can't handle being told no. I chuckled, shaking my head. They've spent their whole lives controlling the narrative. They don't like that they don't have control over me anymore. Richard sat across from me, his expression serious. Do I need to be worried? I met his gaze. No, because I wasn't going to let them win. He studied me for another second before nodding. All right, but listen to me, Lucas. Don't let them pull you into their bullshit. Stay clean. Stay smart. You've worked too damn hard for this. I nodded. I know, but inside, I was furious. Because if they wanted a war, they just got one. I didn't reach out to my father. I didn't call Sylvia. No, I wanted them to think I was ignoring it, that I wasn't taking it seriously. But I was. I was watching. I was waiting. And then, one evening, I got exactly what I needed. A phone call. Not from my father. Not from Sylvia. But from Brandon. I smirked as I picked up. Brandon. There was a long pause before he spoke. Lucas. I could hear the hesitation in his voice. He wasn't sure how this was going to go. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to speak first. Finally, he sighed. Look, man, I know things got weird. But this is getting out of hand. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, you mean the sudden rumors about me? The subtle attempts to damage my reputation? Another pause. I didn't know about that. Don't bullshit me, Brandon. He exhaled. Okay, fine. I knew they were upset, but I didn't think they'd go this far. I leaned back in my chair. Let me guess. Sylvia and Dad spun it like I abandoned them, right? That I'm some cold-hearted bastard who doesn't care about family? Silence. That was my answer. I smirked. And what? You just went along with it. No, he said quickly. I mean, I didn't say anything. I just stayed out of it. Right, I said dryly. Like you always do. Lucas. No, Brandon. Let me ask you something. Where was this concern when Sylvia was treating me like SHD my whole life? When she made sure I always felt like an outsider? Where was this brotherly love when you and Caitlin sat there and watched it happen? He sighed heavily. I don't know, okay? I don't know what you want me to say. I scoffed. You don't have to say anything. I already know who you are. There was a long pause. Then, quietly, he admitted, they told me not to talk to you. I laughed. Of course they did. They think you'll try to turn me against them. I shook my head. I don't need to, Brandon. They'll do that themselves. Another silence. Then, softer, he said, I didn't want it to be like this. Yeah. I said, my voice cold. Then you should have stood up for me a long time ago. I hung up. I didn't need to hear any more. I already knew how this played out. They were getting desperate. And desperate people? They make mistakes. The thing about trying to ruin someone's reputation? It only works if you have credibility. And my father? Sylvia? They had none. I didn't go straight for the KLL. No, I let them dig their own graves. I started hearing more rumors. That I was ungrateful. That I had turned my back on family. That I had used people to get ahead. I made a single move. I invited Richard and a few key colleagues for drinks one night. Casual. Friendly. Nothing unusual. And I told them everything. I didn't play the victim. I didn't whine. I simply laid out the facts. How my father had never treated me like his son. How Sylvia had spent years making sure I felt unwanted. How Brandon and Caitlin had stood by and watched. And how now, only now, when they needed me, they were suddenly family. By the end of the night, Richard leaned back, swirling his whiskey. Well, he said, that changes things. And just like that, the rumors stopped. Because the thing about powerful people, they hate manipulators. And Sylvia, my father, they had overplayed their hand. A week later, I got a text. Sylvia, we need to talk. I didn't respond. A few days after that, I got another. My father, Lucas, let's be reasonable. I still didn't respond. And then, finally, an email. From my father. Subject, one last chance. I opened it. And as I read, I smiled. Because they weren't trying to guilt me anymore. No, they were begging. The tables had turned. And now, it was time to end this. I stared at the email for a long time. My father's message was filled with thinly veiled desperation. He didn't outright apologize. That wasn't his style. But between the lines, I could see it. The panic. The realization that they had lost control. Gerald Harrington. Lucas, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this childish behavior needs to stop. We are family. No matter what has happened in the past, we don't abandon each other. I'm willing to put this behind us if you are. I assume you wouldn't want to burn bridges permanently, especially now that you're in a high position. People notice these things. Reputations matter. Let's meet and discuss how to move forward. Dad, I let out a slow, amused breath. He thought he still had leverage. That I cared about his approval. That I was scared of what people might think. He didn't realize I had already won. But I wasn't done yet. I was going to make them feel it. I agreed to meet. Not at a fancy restaurant. Not at a private club. At a casual, public cafe. Nothing that gave them the upper hand. When I arrived, Sylvia was already there, wearing oversized sunglasses like she was some kind of celebrity hiding from the press. My father sat stiffly beside her, arms crossed. Brandon was there too, looking uncomfortable, while Caitlin scrolled through her phone, acting like she had better places to be. I took my time sitting down, setting my coffee on the table before leaning back. All right, I said. Talk. Sylvia cleared her throat. Lucas, we're not here to argue. I smirked. No? Then what are we here for? My father inhaled deeply, as if forcing patience. You've made your point, he said. You're successful. You're independent. But burning family bridges is never wise. I laughed. See, that's where you're wrong. Because you burned this bridge a long time ago. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. Caitlin sighed, tapping her nails against her phone. Look, my father continued, his tone suddenly softer, like he was trying a different angle. I know you were hurt by things in the past. I admit, we could have handled things differently. I raised an eyebrow. Handled things differently? Dad, you let Sylvia treat me like I was nothing. You stood by and watched while I was excluded from everything. And now, when you need something, you suddenly remember I exist. Sylvia cleared her throat. We're not here to dwell on the past, Lucas. No, you're here because you need favors, I said flatly. Silence. Then my father sighed. Fine. Yes. Caitlin needs an internship, and Brandon needs job connections. Caitlin finally looked up from her phone, flipping her hair. I don't need anything from him. Sylvia shot her a sharp look. I smirked. Interesting. Because last I checked, Sylvia was emailing me about it. And you didn't seem to have a problem when you thought I could help. Caitlin rolled her eyes. Whatever. Brandon shifted forward. Lucas, listen, man. I get that you're upset, but I cut him off. Upset? No, Brandon. I'm just done. Sylvia leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. Lucas, be reasonable. I tilted my head. I am. That's why I'm saying no. Sylvia's expression flickered. You're making a mistake. I smiled. No, Sylvia. You did. Years ago, when you made sure I was never part of this family. She inhaled sharply, like she wanted to argue. I turned to my father. You had your chance, Dad. A lifetime of chances. And you made your choice. His jaw tightened. Lucas, this will come back to you one day. You'll regret turning your back on family. I leaned forward, my voice calm. No, you'll regret turning your back on me. I let those words sink in before I stood up, grabbed my coffee, and walked away. They didn't stop me. They couldn't. Because for the first time in my life, I was free. I didn't block their numbers. I didn't need to. Because I knew they wouldn't reach out again. Not after this. Not after I had made it clear they had no power over me. And as I walked away from that cafe, something settled in my chest. A weight I didn't even realize I had been carrying. I had spent years trying to prove myself to them. But now I didn't need to. Because I had won. And they had lost. Not through revenge. Not through cruelty. But by finally, completely, and permanently walking away. And that was the best revenge of all.